When you think of the legend of Zelda, what comes to mind? Perhaps it's the towering spires of Hyrule Castle, piercing morning mist, or the ancient mysteries hidden within the Temple of Time. Maybe it's the scorching sands of the Gerudo Desert, where secrets lie buried beneath endless dunes, or the sacred groves of the Korok Forest, where ancient spirits guard timeless wisdom. Each location across Hyrule tells a story, not just of adventure and heroism, but of civilizations that rose and fell, of natural forces that shaped the land, and of real-world inspirations that breathe life into these digital realms. Over the next few hours, we'll journey through every iconic corner of this legendary kingdom, exploring the lore that makes each place unforgettable, the real-world cultures and locations that inspired their creation, and the theories that connect them all. In the center of every map, beneath every clouded sky, through every iteration of legend and time, there stands a constant, Hyrule Castle. More than mere stone and mortar, more than simple seat of power, this fortress represents the beating heart of an entire civilization. Its towers have watched empires rise and fall, its walls have sheltered hope in humanity's darkest hours, and its very foundations rest upon secrets that stretch back to the creation of the world itself. The genius of Hyrule Castle lies not in any single incarnation, but in how it evolves while remaining eternally recognizable. In Ocarina of Time, we first encountered it as a pristine white fortress, its blue-tiled roofs gleaming like jewels against the Hyrulean sky. Here was a castle that spoke of peace and prosperity, where young Princess Zelda could play in gardens, while her father held court in halls lined with stained glass. The architecture whispered of European medieval grandeur, its design clearly drawing inspiration from the fairy tale castles of Bavaria, particularly the romantic spires of Neuschwanstein. Yet beneath this beauty lay something more complex. A throne room where political alliances were forged in shadow, where the king of evil himself could walk freely under the guise of diplomacy. This duality would prove prophetic. When Link returned 7 years later, that same pristine castle had transformed into Ganon's Tower, a nightmare of black stone and volcanic fury. The message was unmistakable. Power corrupts not just the wielder, but the very structures that house it. The same walls that once protected became instruments of oppression. The same towers that reached toward heaven now scraped against a sky darkened by malevolence. Yet perhaps nowhere is the castle's evolution more poignant than in Breath of the Wild, where we encounter it as a ruin haunted by ancient tragedy. Here, Nintendo's artists created something unprecedented, a castle that tells its entire history through visual storytelling alone. Each crumbling wall speaks of the great calamity's fury. Each guardian stationed in its halls serves as a monument to failure and loss. The very air around it writhes with malice made manifest, as if the stones themselves remember the horror of that final night 100 years ago. The real-world inspiration here draws not just from European castles, but from the Romantic ruin tradition, those deliberately preserved medieval remnants that dotted the European landscape, reminders of glory, days long past. Think of Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, where legend places King Arthur's birth, or the haunting beauty of Dunluce Castle in Northern Ireland, perched on cliffs above a turbulent sea. These places capture the same melancholic grandeur that Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle embodies. Beauty touched by tragedy, power humbled by time. But the castle's influence extends far beyond its own walls. In every incarnation, it anchors an entire ecosystem of civilization. Castletown sprawls at its feet like a faithful hound, its own fate invariably tied to the fortress above. In times of peace, these settlements bustle with commerce and culture. Markets overflow with goods from every corner of the kingdom. Taverns echo with songs both ancient and new, and children play in streets that have known generations of their families. The destruction of these towns carries particular weight because it represents the collapse of community itself. When Ocarina of Time's Castletown becomes overrun with re-deads, or when Breath of the Wild's central Hyrule lies empty, save for ruins and guardians, we're witnessing the death of more than buildings. We're seeing the end of the social fabric that makes civilization possible. Perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in the sacred ground ruins, found scattered throughout central Hyrule in the modern era. These circular platforms, marked with the Triforce and surrounded by fallen stones, once hosted ceremonies that bound the kingdom together. Here, knights took their oaths in view of the royal family, pledging their lives not just to crown and country, but to the divine mandate that the Triforce represented. The ritualistic nature of these spaces draws clear inspiration from real-world ceremonial sites. Stonehenge, with its mysterious circles of ancient stone, or the forums of Rome, where public life unfolded under the watchful eyes of gods and emperors. Yet these ruins also represent something more personal. In Breath of the Wild, one such site becomes the location where Link was formally appointed as Princess Zelda's knight. We see this moment through recovered memory, a ceremony that should have been a triumph, becoming instead a source of tension and unspoken pain. The princess, struggling under the weight of unawakened powers, watches as acclaim flows toward a silent hero she barely knows. The sacred space, meant to unite, becomes a stage for the loneliness that would ultimately lead to Hyrule's fall. The Temple of Time stands as perhaps the most fascinating example of how architecture can transcend its physical form to become mythological. Across multiple games, this structure serves as a bridge between mortal and divine, a place where the very flow of time can be altered through sacred ritual. Its design deliberately echoes real-world religious architecture, the soaring Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, where stone and light conspired to lift human consciousness toward heaven, or the ancient stone circles of Celtic tradition, where druids marked the turning of seasons and the passage of years. But the temple's true power lies in its constancy across change. Whether standing pristine in Ocarina of Time's market square or crumbling in Twilight Princess's forgotten grove, whether floating above clouds in Tears of the Kingdom or lying in ruins on the Great Plateau, it remains recognizably itself. This persistence suggests something profound about the nature of sacred space, that true holiness transcends physical form, that the divine can consecrate stone and steel as easily as forest grove or mountain peak. The placement of these central locations reveals much about Nintendo's understanding of how geography shapes civilization. Hyrule Castle invariably occupies the physical center of its domain, its position reflecting the medieval European model where royal power radiated outward from a central point like ripples in a pond. Roads converge upon it, trade flows toward it, and in times of crisis, refugees flee to its protection. This centralized model stands in stark contrast to the distributed power structures we see in places like the Gerudo Desert or the scattered settlements of the Great Sea, revealing how different environments and cultures organize themselves around different principles. Yet, there's something deeper at work in these central lands, a connection to the Triforce itself that goes beyond mere political convenience. The very geography seems to pulse with divine energy, as if the Golden Triangle's power has seeped into soil and stone over millennia. Springs sacred to the three goddesses dot the landscape, their waters carrying blessings that can strengthen both blade and spirit. Ancient shrines rise from fields and forests, their trials testing not just skill and courage, but wisdom and understanding. This sacred geography finds its parallel in real-world traditions, where landscape itself becomes holy. Consider the sacred mountains of Japan, where Shinto shrines mark places where kami dwell within the very rocks and trees. Or the ley lines of Celtic tradition, invisible pathways of power that crisscross the landscape, connecting stone circles and barrows in networks of ancient meaning. In Hyrule's central lands, we see this same understanding, that divinity doesn't simply visit the world, but dwells within it, making the very ground beneath our feet a potential gateway to transcendence. The genius of Hyrule's central lands lies in how they balance the personal and the political, the intimate and the epic. Yes, this is where kingdoms rise and fall, where heroes are crowned and villains vanquished. But it's also where a young princess struggles with the weight of expectation, where an amnesiac knight slowly remembers what he's lost, where ordinary people try to build lives worth living amid the chaos of legend. In the end, these landscapes endure because they speak to something fundamental in human experience. Our need for centers that hold, for places that remain constant while everything else changes. Whether that center is a castle, a temple, or simply a quiet grove where memories dwell, we all need somewhere to call the heart of our world. In Hyrule's central lands, Nintendo has given us that center, a place where every road leads home and every legend begins. The shadows grow long across these ancient stones, but the stories they tell remain as vivid as ever. Tomorrow's heroes will walk these same paths, face these same choices, and discover that the true kingdom lies not in castles or crowns, but in the connections we forge and the courage we find to protect what matters most. In the heart of power, after all, beats a very human heart, one that knows both triumph and loss, glory and sacrifice, hope and the endless possibility of redemption. In the north of Hyrule, where the earth itself breathes fire and the air shimmers with heat that could forge legends, rises Death Mountain, a geological giant that has shaped not just the landscape, but the very soul of those who dare call its slopes home. This is no ordinary peak, no simple pile of stone and soil. Death Mountain stands as a testament to the raw, creative, and destructive forces that built the world, a place where the boundary between earth and sky dissolves in curtains of ash and streams of molten rock that flow like rivers of liquid starlight. To understand Death Mountain is to understand the profound relationship between environment and identity, between the challenges a land presents and the character of those who rise to meet them. For here, in caverns that glow with their own inner fire, and on slopes where every step must be earned through courage and determination, we encounter the Gorons, a people who have transformed the mountain's hostility into a source of strength, its dangers into opportunities, its very attempt to consume them into the foundation of their unshakable brotherhood. The mountain's presence looms over nearly every iteration of Hyrule, its volcanic peak visible from almost anywhere in the kingdom like a smoky beacon marking the northern reaches. Yet Death Mountain is far more than a landmark. It's a living entity whose moods and temperaments directly influence the fate of those below. When the mountain sleeps peacefully, the Gorons prosper, their mines yield precious gems and metals, and travelers can safely traverse the winding paths that spiral up its flanks. But when Death Mountain stirs in restless anger, when its peak glows ominously against the night sky and tremors shake, loose boulders from impossible heights, then all of Hyrule holds its breath and waits for the mountain's fury to pass. The real-world inspiration for this volatile giant draws from our planet's most famous volcanic peaks, each carrying their own mythology and cultural significance. Mount Fuji, Japan's sacred mountain, provides perhaps the clearest parallel, a peak so perfectly formed and spiritually significant that it has inspired artists and pilgrims for millennia. Like Death Mountain, Fuji represents the dual nature of volcanic forces, capable of both destruction and creation, feared and revered in equal measure. The mountain's cultural importance in Japanese society, where it serves as both artistic subject and spiritual destination, mirrors how Death Mountain functions as more than mere geography in Hyrule. It's a character in its own right, with its own will and personality. Yet Death Mountain's design also draws inspiration from Iceland's volcanic landscapes, where fire and ice exist in perpetual tension, where geysers erupt with clockwork precision, and where the very ground beneath your feet might split open to reveal the molten heart of the earth. The otherworldly quality of these places, where normal rules of temperature and terrain don't seem to apply, captures something essential about what makes Death Mountain feel genuinely alien, even as it remains familiar. But it's in the mountain's inhabitants that we find its true character revealed. The Gorons represent one of gaming's most distinctive takes on how environment shapes culture, how geographical challenges can become sources of strength rather than mere obstacles to overcome. Unlike humans, who might build walls against the mountain's heat or flee to more hospitable climates, the Gorons have embraced their volcanic home so completely that they've become part of it. Their rock-like skin doesn't just protect them from temperatures that would instantly incinerate other races. It makes them living extensions of the mountain itself, brothers to the very stones they walk upon. Goron society reflects this deep integration with their environment in every aspect of their culture. Their architecture doesn't fight against the mountain's heat, but celebrates it, incorporating natural lava flows as both practical heating systems and beautiful design elements. Their diet consists primarily of rocks and minerals, transforming what others would see as inedible stone into nourishing sustenance. Even their language and customs reflect this unique relationship. They address each other as brother, emphasizing the familial bonds that help them survive in an environment where cooperation often means the difference between life and death. This brotherhood extends beyond mere social nicety into something approaching spiritual doctrine. In Goron culture, the concept of individual achievement means nothing without community success. A Goron who discovers a rich vein of ore celebrates by sharing the news with his brothers. A warrior who proves his strength in battle is praised not for personal glory, but for how his strength serves the tribe. This collective mindset reflects the practical reality of volcanic living. When the mountain's mood turns dangerous, when rock slides threaten or lava flows change course, survival depends on everyone working together with perfect coordination. The craft traditions that emerge from this culture represent some of the most sophisticated metallurgy and stonework in all of Hyrule. Goron smiths don't simply work with heat, they partner with it, understanding fire as a collaborator rather than a tool. Their forges don't fight against the mountain's natural furnaces, but channel them, creating workshops where volcanic heat is directed and focused with precision that approaches artistry. The weapons and tools that emerge from these forges carry something of the mountain's own strength, imbued with a durability that comes not just from superior materials, but from the spiritual connection between maker, material, and environment. This spiritual dimension of Goron craftsmanship finds its parallel in real-world traditions, where blacksmithing approaches the sacred. Japanese sword-making, with its emphasis on spiritual preparation and the almost mystical relationship between smith and steel, offers perhaps the closest comparison. Like the legendary swordsmiths who would purify themselves through ritual and meditation before beginning their work, Goron crafters understand that their art requires more than mere technical skill. It demands a harmony between creator, creation, and the elemental forces that make creation possible. The architecture of Goron City itself tells the story of this harmonious relationship with volcanic forces. Rather than building structures that simply resist the mountain's heat, Goron architects have created spaces that work with thermal dynamics, channeling hot air for heating and ventilation while using the natural properties of volcanic stone for both structural integrity and aesthetic beauty. The result is architecture that feels grown rather than built, as if the city had emerged naturally from the mountain's own creative processes, rather than being imposed upon them by external will. The Fire Temple, Death Mountain's most sacred space, represents the ultimate expression of this architectural philosophy. Here, in chambers that exist at the very heart of the volcanic system, we find rooms where lava flows serve as both obstacle and pathway, where the temple's very structure incorporates the mountain's molten arteries into its design. This isn't simply engineering, it's theology made manifest in stone and flame, a physical representation of the Goron belief that spiritual truth can be found by embracing rather than fleeing from life's most challenging elements. Walking through the Fire Temple's corridors, we encounter puzzles that require not just intelligence, but understanding of how heat, pressure, and timing interact in volcanic environments. Switches must be activated by specific temperatures, pathways open and close based on lava flow cycles, and progress often requires waiting for the mountain's own rhythms to align with human intention. This integration of natural process into sacred space reflects a sophisticated understanding of how landscape and spirituality can enhance each other rather than existing in tension. The temple's boss chamber, where ancient guardians slumber until disturbed, represents another layer of meaning in Goron's sacred architecture. These creatures, whether the mighty King Dodongo or the ancient dragon Volvagia, aren't simply monsters to be defeated, but representatives of the mountain's own protective spirit, manifestations of death. Mountain's refusal to give up its secrets easily. The battles fought in these chambers aren't just tests of strength, but negotiations with the mountain itself, struggles to prove worthiness for the treasures and knowledge hidden in its deepest reaches. Yet Death Mountain's influence extends far beyond its immediate slopes into the economic and cultural life of Greater Hyrule. The precious metals and gems extracted from its mines fuel trade, relationships that connect the isolated Goron communities to the broader kingdom. Iron from Death Mountain forges becomes swords that protect Hyrulean knights, silver and gold from its depths fund royal treasuries, and the rare gems found only in its deepest caverns become components in magical artifacts that shape the fate of nations. This economic relationship reveals something profound about how geographical resources shape political power in the Zelda universe. Death Mountain's mineral wealth makes the Gorons valuable allies, but their geographic isolation and cultural differences also make them natural targets for those who would prefer to simply take what they need rather than trade for it. The recurring theme of Goron communities under threat, whether from monsters, political enemies, or the mountain's own volcanic fury, reflects real-world patterns where resource-rich communities often find themselves caught between the value of what they possess and their ability to defend it. The volcanic ecology of Death Mountain creates micro-environments that exist nowhere else in Hyrule, supporting life forms adapted to extreme heat and mineral-rich soil. Fire-resistant plants like the fire flower don't simply tolerate these conditions, but require them. Their entire life cycles dependent on temperatures that would instantly kill vegetation from more temperate climates. These botanical adaptations mirror the Goron's own evolutionary relationship with their environment, suggesting that Death Mountain's influence extends to every level of biological organization, from the cellular adaptations that allow survival in extreme heat to the cultural practices that turn environmental challenges into sources of strength. The mountain's weather patterns create their own microclimate, where ash falls like snow and thermal vents create updrafts that can carry birds or skilled gliders to impossible heights. The interplay between volcanic activity and atmospheric conditions produces phenomena found nowhere else in Hyrule, from the rainbow-colored mineral springs where different metallic compounds create shifting patterns of color, to the obsidian fields where cooled lava has created landscapes that seem carved from black glass. These unique environmental features have shaped not just Goron culture, but their spiritual beliefs as well. The mountain's ability to create and destroy, often simultaneously, provides a constant reminder of the powerful forces that govern existence. Goron philosophy reflects this dual nature, emphasizing both the importance of strength and the wisdom of knowing when to yield to greater powers. Their creation myths speak of ancient fires that gave birth to both mountain and people, suggesting a cosmology where identity and environment emerge from the same primordial source. As our journey through Death Mountain's smoking slopes draws toward its conclusion, we find ourselves understanding something essential about the relationship between challenge and character, between the demands of environment and the responses of those who call it home. The Gorons haven't simply adapted to Death Mountain's harsh conditions. They've transformed those conditions into the foundation of a culture that values brotherhood, celebrates craftsmanship, and understands that true strength comes not from conquering difficulty, but from embracing it as a source of growth. In the end, Death Mountain stands as more than just a geographic feature or a challenging dungeon. It represents the possibility that even the most hostile environments can become homes when approached with courage, wisdom, and the willingness to see opportunity where others might see only danger. The mountain's fires continue to burn, its slopes continue to challenge all who dare climb them. But in the laughter of Goron brothers sharing a meal of rocks and the ring of hammers shaping steel in volcanic forges, we hear the sound of a people who have found not just survival, but joy in the heart of the flame. The volcanic giant sleeps for now, its peak wreathed in clouds that glow with inner fire, but its lessons burn eternal. That strength shared becomes unbreakable, that wisdom lies in working with rather than against the forces that shape us, and that even the most forbidding places can become homes when we learn to see their hidden gifts. Tomorrow's heroes will climb these same smoking slopes, face these same trials of fire and stone, and discover for themselves that the mountain's greatest treasure isn't found in its deepest mines, but in the understanding that comes from learning to dance with danger rather than simply enduring it. Where fire meets water, where stone gives way to current, and where the very lifeblood of Hyrule flows in endless circuits of renewal and sustenance, we discover the aquatic heart of the kingdom, a realm where the Zora have built their civilization not despite the challenges of liquid architecture, but because of the unique possibilities that water itself provides. This is Zora's domain, and the greater network of lakes, rivers, and springs that pulse through Hyrule like arteries carrying life to every corner of the land. To understand the genius of Zora's domain is to appreciate one of the most sophisticated examples of environmental architecture ever conceived. Spaces that don't simply exist near water, but are carved from it, shaped by it, and given meaning through humanity's eternal relationship with the element that sustains all life. Unlike the solid permanence of stone castles or the defiant verticality of mountain citadels, Zora's domain flows and shifts with the rhythms of its aquatic foundation, creating architecture that breathes with the tides and changes, character with every shift in current and light. The domain's most striking feature has always been its integration of natural water systems with constructed space. In Ocarina of Time, we first encountered it as a series of cascading pools connected by waterfalls that served simultaneously as transportation, decoration, and defense. Here was architecture that understood water not as obstacle, but as opportunity. Where most civilizations might build bridges to cross streams, the Zora built with streams, making the flowing water itself an integral part of their living space. Pools at different elevations created natural amphitheaters, where the sound of falling water provided both acoustic enhancement and constant soothing background music that turned everyday conversation into something approaching musical performance. This design philosophy draws clear inspiration from some of humanity's most ambitious aquatic architecture, particularly the water gardens of the Islamic world, where engineers and artists collaborated to create spaces where water, light, and stone combined in compositions of almost supernatural beauty. The Alhambra in Granada, with its court of lions where water flows in perfectly calculated channels that both cool the air and create patterns of sound and movement, provides perhaps the closest real-world parallel to the Zora aesthetic. Like the builders of these earthly paradises, Zora architects understand that water in motion possesses qualities that static elements cannot match. It catches and refracts light in constantly changing patterns, creates sounds that can mask conversation or enhance music, and establishes rhythms that can influence mood and thought in profound ways. Yet Zora's domain also draws inspiration from more mysterious sources, the legendary underwater cities of human mythology, places like Atlantis where advanced civilizations supposedly mastered the art of living beneath the waves. In Breath of the Wild's version of the domain, we see this influence most clearly in the blue luminescence that emanates from the very stones of the construction, creating an underwater ambiance, even in air-filled spaces. This ethereal lighting doesn't simply illuminate, it transforms ordinary architectural elements into something that seems alive, pulsing gently like the heartbeat of some vast aquatic creature. The Zora themselves represent perhaps the most successful adaptation to aquatic life found in any fantasy universe, and their society reflects the unique opportunities and challenges that come with mastering both water and land. Unlike purely aquatic species that might be limited to underwater existence, or land dwellers who treat water as a barrier to overcome, the Zora have achieved something remarkable: true amphibious culture that draws strength from both environments without being limited by either. This dual nature shapes every aspect of Zora society, from their governance structures to their artistic traditions. The Zora monarchy, for instance, reflects the fluid dynamics of water itself. Authority flows from the royal family outward through the community like currents in a stream, with different individuals taking leadership roles in different contexts based on expertise and situation rather than rigid hierarchical control. During times of peace, the king might defer to master craftsmen when discussing the construction of new waterways. In times of conflict, experienced warriors like the river Zora take precedence in strategic planning. This flexible approach to leadership mirrors the way water itself adapts to whatever container holds it while maintaining its essential character. Zora artistic traditions reveal even more about how aquatic environment shapes culture. Their music, built around flowing melodies that mimic the sounds of streams and waterfalls, creates compositions that seem to emerge naturally from their environment, rather than being imposed upon it. The famous Zora's Sapphire ceremony, where Princess Ruto bestows the spiritual stone that represents her people's connection to the element of water, incorporates musical elements that literally cause the water around the ceremony to respond, creating visual displays where drops and currents move in harmony with the performed melody. This integration of music and water speaks to something profound about Zora understanding of their element. For them, water isn't simply a substance to be manipulated or a medium to be traversed. It's a partner in creation, a collaborator that brings its own voice to artistic expression. The fact that Zora musical traditions can actually influence water behavior suggests a level of harmony between species and element that goes beyond mere adaptation into something approaching mystical communion. The architectural evolution of the domain across different games reveals how this philosophy adapts to changing circumstances while maintaining its core principles. In Twilight, Princess, where the domain appeared frozen under a curse of unnatural ice, we witnessed what happens when this harmony is disrupted. The normally flowing architecture became rigid and lifeless, its organic curves trapped in crystalline stasis that transformed a space of movement and life into something resembling a tomb. The visual impact of this transformation was devastating, precisely because it violated everything that made the domain beautiful. Its fluidity, its responsiveness to change, its living integration with water's natural properties. The restoration of the domain in that same game provided one of the most satisfying moments in Zelda history, precisely because it represented more than just solving a puzzle or defeating an enemy. It meant bringing a fundamental force of nature back into proper balance. When the ice melted and water began flowing again, through channels that had been designed for its passage, when the pools refilled and the waterfalls resumed their eternal cascade, we witnessed the resurrection of an entire way of life that depended on the continued partnership between Zora civilization and the element that sustained it. Lake Hylia, the domain's connection to Hyrule's broader water systems, represents another dimension of aquatic architecture, the management of water resources on a kingdom-wide scale. This vast lake serves not just as a recreational space or a source of fish, but as a critical component in Hyrule's hydrological cycle. The lake's connection to underground springs, its role in seasonal flood control, and its function as a reservoir during times of drought reveals sophisticated understanding of how water systems operate at landscape scale. The fishing hole found near Lake Hylia provides insight into another aspect of water culture, the meditative and recreational possibilities that aquatic environments offer. Here, in quiet pools where time seems to slow and the ordinary concerns of adventure give way to patient observation and gentle skill, we find spaces designed not for grand heroics, but for quiet contemplation. The act of fishing in these games transcends simple resource gathering to become something approaching spiritual practice, where success depends not on force or speed, but on understanding rhythm, reading subtle signs, and developing the patience to work within natural cycles rather than demanding immediate results. This contemplative aspect of water culture finds its parallel in real-world fishing traditions, from Japanese tenkara fishing with its emphasis on simplicity and harmony with natural environments, to the quiet waters of English chalk streams, where generations of anglers have perfected techniques that prioritize understanding over dominance. The famous fishing hole keeper, with his deep knowledge of seasonal patterns and fish behavior, represents the culmination of this tradition, someone whose expertise comes not from academic study, but from years of patient observation and respectful interaction with aquatic life. The water temple, whether in its Ocarina of Time incarnation or its various successors, pushes the architectural possibilities of aquatic design to their absolute limits. Here, in chambers where water level can be manipulated to reveal new pathways and hide others, where currents can be redirected to power ancient mechanisms, and where the very concept of up and down becomes fluid, depending on which passages are filled and which remain dry, we encounter space that challenges our most basic assumptions about how buildings work. These temple designs require players to think in 3 dimensions, enhanced by a 4th, the dimension of water level, which transforms the same physical space into completely different navigational challenges depending on whether chambers are flooded or drained. This isn't simply clever level design, it's architectural philosophy made interactive, forcing us to experience firsthand how profoundly water can alter our relationship with space and movement. The infamous complexity of water-based dungeons, often cited as among the most challenging in the entire Zelda series, reflects something important about aquatic environments in general. They demand a different kind of thinking, a willingness to embrace fluidity and change rather than relying on fixed reference points and unchanging landmarks. Success in these spaces requires developing what might be called liquid intelligence, the ability to navigate by understanding flow and current rather than memorizing static maps, to solve problems by working with water's properties rather than against them. Yet beyond the domain and its associated temples lies the broader network of springs, streams, and sacred pools that carry water's influence throughout Hyrule. The various fairy fountains, with their healing waters and mysterious guardians, represent another aspect of aquatic sacred architecture. These spaces, often hidden away in grottos or forest clearings, create intimate environments where the restorative properties of water can work their magic on both body and spirit. The Great Fairy. Fountains in particular demonstrate how water can be incorporated into spaces designed for transformation and renewal. The pools in these hidden sanctuaries don't simply contain water. They contain water that has been charged with magical properties, transformed through proximity to fairy magic into something capable of enhancing equipment, restoring health, or even granting new abilities. This mystical enhancement of water's natural properties reflects ancient real-world beliefs about sacred springs and healing waters, from the oracle at Delphi with its mysteriously potent vapors to the healing springs of Bath in Roman Britain. As we explore these aquatic realms, we begin to understand that the Zora and their domain represent something more than simply another fantasy race and their homeland. They embody a different approach to civilization itself, one that emphasizes adaptation rather than domination, flow rather than rigid structure, harmony rather than conquest. Their success in creating beautiful, functional spaces that work with water rather than against it offers lessons that extend far beyond the boundaries of any game. In our own world, where water management has become one of the critical challenges of the 21st century, where cities flood because we've forgotten how to build with natural water systems rather than against them, the Zora approach to aquatic architecture offers more than just aesthetic inspiration. It provides a model for how human civilization might learn to work with natural forces rather than simply trying to control them. The gentle sound of water flowing through carved channels, the play of light on liquid surfaces that shift and change with every movement, the cooling effect of evaporation that makes even hot days pleasant in properly designed aquatic spaces. These aren't just pleasant details in a fantasy world, but reminders of possibilities that exist in our own relationship with water when we approach it as partner rather than adversary. The eternal flow continues through Zora's domain and across all the waterways of Hyrule, carrying with it the promise that life, like water, always finds a way to adapt, to flow around obstacles, and to transform even the most challenging circumstances into opportunities for beauty and growth. In the liquid heart of the kingdom, we find not just the source of physical sustenance, but a philosophy of existence that celebrates change as the only constant, adaptation as the highest art, and the flowing dance between tradition and innovation as the true secret of lasting prosperity. Where the sun beats down without mercy and the horizon shimmers with heat that distorts reality itself, where survival depends not on conquering the desert, but on learning to dance with its deadly rhythms. We enter the realm of the Gerudo, a land where the harshest environment in all of Hyrule has forged perhaps its strongest people. This is the Gerudo Desert, and the settlements that rise from its golden sands like mirages made manifest, places where the very act of existence becomes an art form practiced by those who understand that true strength emerges not from abundance, but from the wisdom to thrive where others would merely endure. The Gerudo Desert stretches endlessly across western Hyrule, a sea of sand and stone that changes mood with the shifting light, transforming from burnished gold at dawn to deep amber at sunset, from silver mystery under moonlight to blazing white hostility when the sun reaches its merciless zenith. This is landscape as character, terrain that actively participates in every story told within its boundaries. The desert doesn't simply provide a backdrop for adventure. It shapes every moment, influences every decision, and tests every traveler who dares venture into its embrace. Understanding the desert means understanding paradox itself. By day, temperatures soar to levels that can kill the unprepared within hours. Yet by night, the same sands that burn bare feet at noon become so cold that survival depends on finding shelter and warmth. Water, the most precious commodity in this realm, exists in hidden springs and oases that can mean the difference between life and death. Yet these same life-giving sources are often guarded by dangers that make their discovery as perilous as their absence. The real-world inspiration for this landscape draws from our planet's most famous desert regions, particularly the Sahara, with its vast expanses of shifting dunes, and the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, where some of humanity's most remarkable adaptive cultures have flourished for millennia. Like the Bedouin peoples, who learned to read the subtle signs that distinguish one seemingly identical stretch of sand from another, who developed navigation techniques that could guide travelers across trackless wastes, using only stars and wind patterns, the Gerudo have mastered the art of desert survival so completely that they've transformed environmental hostility into cultural strength. Yet the Gerudo Desert also draws inspiration from the American Southwest, where Native American cultures like the Pueblo peoples developed sophisticated understanding of water conservation, seasonal cycles, and the delicate balance required to maintain civilization in environments where every resource must be carefully managed. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde, built into rock formations that provide both shelter and defense, find their echo in Gerudo architectural practices that work with natural formations rather than imposing foreign designs upon hostile landscape. The Gerudo Fortress stands as perhaps the most perfect example of defensive architecture adapted to desert conditions. Unlike the soaring towers of Hyrule Castle or the flowing organic forms of Zora's Domain, Gerudo military architecture emphasizes horizontal spread, thick walls that provide thermal mass against temperature extremes, and strategic positioning that takes advantage of natural rock formations for both protection and concealment. The fortress doesn't fight against the desert environment. It becomes part of it, its walls the same color as surrounding sandstone, its layout following the natural contours of the land. This integration with landscape reflects deeper principles of Gerudo military philosophy. Their warriors don't simply train to fight in the desert. They train to become extensions of the desert itself, using heat shimmer to mask approach routes, understanding sand patterns that reveal the passage of enemies, knowing wind directions that can carry sound or scatter it uselessly across empty dunes. The famous Gerudo stealth techniques emerge not from abstract martial arts, but from intimate knowledge of how their environment can be turned into ally and weapon simultaneously. The fortress's defensive systems demonstrate this environmental integration at its most sophisticated. Guard towers positioned to take advantage of natural sight lines across the desert, gates designed to funnel attacking forces into kill zones, where the sun's angle at different times of day creates blinding glare for enemies, while leaving defenders in shadow. Water systems that can be protected during siege while remaining accessible during normal operations. Every element reflects understanding that successful desert warfare depends on working with natural forces rather than against them. Within the fortress walls, we encounter Gerudo society at its most militarized, yet also at its most revealing. The all-female warrior culture that has emerged here represents one of the most unique social experiments in the Zelda universe, a civilization that has not only survived, but flourished despite, or perhaps because of, the absence of traditional gender dynamics that define most other Hyrulean cultures. This isn't simply a case of women filling roles typically assigned to men in other societies, but rather the development of entirely different approaches to leadership, conflict resolution, and social organization that emerge from specifically female perspectives on power and community. The Gerudo understanding of leadership, for instance, emphasizes consensus building and collaborative decision-making in ways that contrast sharply with the more hierarchical structures found in places like Hyrule Castle or even Goron society. While they certainly have clear chains of command necessary for military effectiveness, Gerudo leaders are expected to rule through inspiration and earned respect rather than inherited authority or imposed dominance. This approach reflects practical wisdom born from desert survival. In environments where cooperation can mean the difference between life and death, leaders who cannot inspire genuine loyalty rather than mere obedience will not long retain the trust necessary for group survival. Yet the most fascinating aspect of Gerudo culture lies not in their military prowess or social organization, but in their relationship with the cycle of scarcity and abundance that defines desert existence. Unlike cultures that develop around reliable resources, the Gerudo have built their entire way of life around the understanding that feast and famine, plenty and want, are not aberrations to be prevented, but natural rhythms to be anticipated and prepared for. This cyclical thinking influences everything from their food preservation techniques to their spiritual beliefs to their approach to trade and diplomacy. The famous Gerudo trading expeditions represent this adaptive thinking at its most sophisticated. Rather than attempting to create permanent trade relationships based on steady exchange of goods, Gerudo merchants operate more like seasonal winds, appearing when they have surplus to trade or specific needs to fill, then vanishing back into the desert until conditions favor another expedition. This approach allows them to take advantage of price fluctuations and seasonal demands in ways that more predictable trading partners cannot match, while also maintaining the independence and mobility that desert survival requires. Gerudo Town itself, whether in its ancient incarnations or its modern form in Breath of the Wild, represents perhaps the most successful example of urban planning adapted to extreme desert conditions. The town's architecture demonstrates sophisticated understanding of thermal dynamics, with buildings designed to create cooling airflow during the heat of the day, while retaining warmth during cold desert nights. Narrow streets that provide shade during peak sun hours, central courtyards that create cooling downdrafts, and building materials that absorb heat during the day and release it slowly after sunset. Every element serves dual purposes of comfort and survival. The town's water management systems reveal even more about Gerudo ingenuity in the face of scarcity. Rather than depending on a single major source, the settlement incorporates multiple backup systems, from deep wells that tap into underground aquifers to ingenious collection systems that capture and store the brief but intense rainfall that occasionally blesses the desert. The famous oasis at the town's heart serves not just as a beautiful centerpiece, but as the visible symbol of the community's success in creating abundance from scarcity. Yet perhaps the most remarkable feature of Gerudo Town is how it manages to be simultaneously welcoming and exclusive, open to trade and cultural exchange, while maintaining the strict boundaries necessary for the preservation of Gerudo cultural identity. The famous prohibition on male visitors reflects not simple prejudice, but practical understanding that maintaining cultural distinctiveness requires careful management of outside influence. In a harsh environment where survival depends on group cohesion and shared values, unlimited cultural mixing could threaten the very adaptations that make desert life possible. The Spirit Temple, hidden in the deep desert beyond the haunted wasteland, represents Gerudo spiritual architecture at its most sophisticated. This massive structure, carved directly from desert rock formations, demonstrates how sacred space can emerge from collaboration with rather than domination of natural landscape. The temple's chambers, cooled by ingenious ventilation systems that channel desert winds through carefully designed passages, create environments where meditation and spiritual practice can flourish even in the heart of one of the most hostile climates imaginable. The temple's design philosophy reflects distinctly Gerudo approaches to spirituality, emphasizing endurance, transformation through trial, and the discovery of inner strength through confrontation with external challenge. Unlike temples in more hospitable environments that might focus on beauty or transcendence through comfort, the Spirit Temple acknowledges that spiritual growth often requires embracing discomfort, accepting challenge, and finding peace not through the absence of struggle, but through the development of strength sufficient to meet any struggle with grace. The temple's famous trials, where visitors must prove their worth through challenges that test not just physical capability, but wisdom, courage, and spiritual maturity, reflect this philosophy in practice. These aren't simply obstacles to overcome, but opportunities for transformation, chances to discover capabilities that might never emerge in easier circumstances. The temple's architects understood something profound about human nature, that our greatest potential often lies dormant until awakened by necessity, that comfort can be the enemy of growth, and that the greatest treasures are often found only by those willing to brave the greatest dangers. The haunted wasteland itself, that seemingly empty expanse of sand and stone that must be crossed to reach the temple, represents another dimension of desert wisdom. This isn't simply empty space to be endured, but a carefully designed trial that teaches essential lessons about desert survival while testing the determination of those who seek the temple's secrets. The shifting sands that can disorient travelers, the phantom guide that must be followed to find safe passage, the sandstorms that can suddenly transform familiar landscape into alien maze. All of these elements serve as both practical obstacles and spiritual metaphors. Navigating the haunted wasteland requires developing what might be called desert consciousness, the ability to read subtle signs that distinguish safe passage from deadly detour, to trust in guidance that may not always seem logical, to maintain direction and purpose even when landmarks disappear and familiar reference points vanish in shifting light and blowing sand. These skills, once developed, serve travelers well, not just in physical desert, but in all of life's uncertain passages, where the way forward is unclear and success depends on inner compass more than external guidance. The economic systems that emerge from desert scarcity reveal another aspect of Gerudo ingenuity. Rather than the abundance-based economies found in more fertile regions, Gerudo trade focuses on high-value, low-volume goods that can withstand long transport across difficult terrain. Precious gems and metals extracted from desert mines, rare spices and medicines that grow only in specific microclimates, specialized equipment designed for extreme conditions. These form the backbone of an economy that thrives precisely because it has learned to create value from things others cannot easily obtain or duplicate. This specialization extends to services as well as goods. Gerudo guides who can safely lead expeditions across the desert command premium prices because their knowledge cannot be easily replaced. Gerudo warriors serve as elite mercenaries because their desert-forged skills translate into advantages in any challenging environment. Even Gerudo cultural practices, from their distinctive clothing designs that provide both protection and style in extreme heat, to their preservation techniques that can keep food edible for months without refrigeration, become valuable trade commodities in a world where such knowledge can mean survival. As our journey through the golden sands draws toward its close, we find ourselves understanding something essential about the relationship between environment and character, between the challenges we face and the strengths we develop in response. The Gerudo haven't simply survived in one of Hyrule's most hostile environments. They've used that hostility as a forge in which to hammer out a culture of remarkable strength, adaptability, and wisdom. In the end, the Gerudo Desert stands as testament to the transformative power of adversity, proof that the greatest beauty often blooms in the harshest soil, and reminder that survival is not simply about enduring what we cannot change, but about discovering how those very unchangeable forces can become sources of strength rather than merely obstacles to overcome. The desert winds continue to blow, carrying stories of courage across endless dunes, and in their whispered songs, we hear the eternal truth that home is not a place of comfort, but a place where we learn to be our strongest selves. Deep in the heart of Hyrule, where ancient paths wind through groves that have stood since the world was young, where sunlight filters through canopies so thick that day and night blend into eternal twilight, we enter realms where time itself moves differently, where the very air whispers with secrets older than kingdoms, and the ground beneath our feet pulses with magic that connects all living things. These are the sacred forests of Hyrule, the Lost Woods, the Kokiri Forest, the Sacred Grove, places where the boundary between mortal world and fairy realm grows thin, where those who enter without proper preparation may find themselves wandering forever, and where the guardians of nature's deepest mysteries maintain their eternal watch. To understand these woodlands is to grasp something fundamental about the relationship between civilization and wilderness, between the tamed spaces where mortals build their lives and the wild places that remain forever beyond human control. These forests serve as more than mere geographical features. They function as thresholds, testing grounds where heroes are sorted from ordinary adventurers, where wisdom proves more valuable than strength, and where the ability to listen becomes more important than the power to command. The Lost Woods stand as perhaps the most mysterious location in all of Hyrule, a maze where the normal rules of navigation cease to function and progress depends not on maps or landmarks, but on understanding the forest's own arcane logic. Unlike ordinary wilderness that might confuse travelers through natural complexity, the Lost Woods confound visitors through supernatural means, creating pathways that loop back on themselves, clearings that appear identical but lead to vastly different destinations, and routes that change based on the intentions and worthiness of those who attempt to follow them. This magical geography draws inspiration from real-world folklore traditions, where forests serve as entrances to otherworldly realms. The Celtic City Mounds, hidden doorways to fairy kingdoms that could be found only by those who possess the proper knowledge or pure intentions, provide one clear parallel. Germanic tales of enchanted woods where time flows differently, and travelers emerge to find that decades have passed in what felt like hours, offer another. The twisted fairy tale forests of the Brothers Grimm, where paths shift and change according to narrative necessity rather than physical laws, capture something essential about how these Zelda woodlands operate. Yet the Lost Woods also reflect more ancient spiritual traditions, particularly those found in shamanic cultures, where sacred groves serve as places of vision and transformation. These real-world sacred forests, from the oracle of Dodona's whispering oaks in ancient Greece to the sacred groves of the Celtic Druids, were understood to be places where the normal world connected to spiritual realms, where proper preparation and respectful approach could lead to profound revelation, but where careless entry might result in madness or worse. The forest's ability to transform lost travelers into skull kids or stalfos reflects these ancient fears about the dangers of venturing unprepared into spaces where human will means nothing and supernatural forces hold absolute dominion. Yet this transformation also suggests possibility rather than mere punishment. Those who become lost in the woods don't simply die, but are changed into something else, absorbed into the forest's own community of spirits and guardians. The tragedy lies not in destruction, but in separation from mortal life, in becoming part of something eternal but alien to human understanding. Kokiri Forest, nestled in the protective heart of the Lost Woods, represents perhaps the most successful example of mortal settlement within an enchanted realm. Here, in clearings where houses grow from living trees and bridges span streams that sing with their own voices, we find a community that has learned to live in harmony with forces that might destroy less adaptable peoples. The Kokiri themselves embody this harmony, remaining forever children, not through curse or limitation, but through their deep integration with forest magic that keeps them connected to the wonder and innocence necessary for coexistence with fairy folk. The architecture of Kokiri Forest demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how to build within an enchanted environment without destroying the very magic that makes such places special. Rather than imposing foreign designs upon the woodland setting, kokiri builders work with existing trees, encouraging growth patterns that naturally create living structures. Their houses don't interrupt the forest canopy, but become part of it, with walls that breathe and roofs that change color with the seasons. Even their pathways follow deer tracks and stream courses rather than cutting straight lines through the undergrowth, maintaining the organic flow that keeps the forest's magic intact. The great Deku tree, guardian deity of these woodlands, represents the ultimate expression of this harmony between natural and supernatural, between plant and consciousness. This ancient being serves not as ruler in any human sense, but as steward and protector, maintaining the delicate balance that allows mortal and immortal to coexist within the same space. The tree's great age and vast wisdom make it a living library of forest lore, but its true power lies in its ability to nurture rather than dominate, to guide without controlling, to protect without possessing. The relationship between the Deku tree and its forest community reflects real-world traditions of sacred groves where ancient trees serve as focal points for spiritual practice. The oak groves of Celtic druids, where specific trees were understood to house spirits and serve as conduits for divine wisdom, provide one model. The sacred Bo trees of Buddhist tradition, where enlightenment can bloom through patient meditation in the presence of ancient wisdom, offer another. In both traditions, the tree serves not as mere plant, but as teacher, guide, and protector rolled into one living entity. Inside the great Deku tree, we encounter one of the most sophisticated examples of organic architecture in any fantasy setting. The chambers and passages that wind through the tree's massive trunk don't feel carved or constructed but grown, as if the ancient being had shaped its own interior spaces through centuries of patient cultivation. The puzzles and challenges found within these passages test not just cleverness and courage, but respect for natural processes, understanding of how living systems work, and willingness to collaborate with rather than dominate the forces encountered. The various creatures that inhabit these internal chambers, from helpful spiders to dangerous Goma queens, represent different aspects of the forest ecosystem, each playing its role in maintaining the tree's health and protecting its secrets from those who would exploit rather than honor the wisdom contained within. The battles fought in these chambers aren't simply obstacles to overcome, but negotiations with the forest's immune system, opportunities to prove that the visitor comes as friend rather than parasite. The music that pervades these forest realms deserves special attention, for in no other environment do we find sound and magic so intimately connected. Saria's song, that simple melody that can call across vast distances and even pierce the barriers between dimensions, represents more than mere communication. It embodies the very essence of forest harmony, the underlying rhythm that connects all life within the woodland realm. Learning to play this song doesn't simply mean memorizing notes, but understanding how sound can weave itself into the fabric of natural magic. This musical dimension of forest magic draws from real-world traditions where certain locations are understood to possess their own acoustic properties that enhance spiritual practice. The whispering galleries of ancient cathedrals, where architectural design creates acoustic effects that seem supernatural to those unfamiliar with their construction, offer one parallel. The resonant caves used by shamanic traditions for ritual chanting, where natural acoustics amplify human voice, into something approaching divine power, provide another. In forest settings specifically, the tradition of wind harps, instruments that make music from natural air currents, captures something essential about how these woodlands generate their own soundscapes. The sacred grove, hidden deep within the forest's most protected reaches, represents the ultimate expression of woodland sanctity. Here, in clearings where moonlight falls with particular intensity, and ancient stones mark boundaries between mortal and immortal realms, we find spaces devoted purely to the preservation and protection of natural magic. These aren't simply pretty clearings, but active temples, where the force that keeps the forests alive and aware is concentrated and focused. The Master Sword's resting place within these sacred spaces reveals something profound about the relationship between natural magic and heroic destiny. The blade doesn't simply happen to be stored in forest temples. It belongs there, draws power from the same sources that keep the trees healthy and the guardian spirits alert. The various trials that heroes must pass to prove worthy of the sword aren't arbitrary tests, but necessary demonstrations that they understand the responsibility that comes with wielding power, drawn from the Earth's own life force. These trials often involve not combat, but service, not conquest, but cooperation. Heroes must demonstrate their ability to heal damaged ecosystems, to communicate with spirits that have been harmed by outside interference, to restore balance that has been disrupted by those who take without giving back. The sword reveals itself only to those who understand that true power means protecting rather than dominating, nurturing rather than exploiting, serving rather than commanding. The temple and ruins scattered throughout these woodland realms tell stories of civilizations that attempted to coexist with forest magic with varying degrees of success. The forest temple, in its various incarnations across different games, demonstrates both the possibilities and the dangers of building permanent structures within enchanted woodlands. When maintained with proper respect for the forces that surround them, these temples become focal points where natural and constructed magic can enhance each other. When neglected or corrupted, they become prisons where evil can take root and spread like infection through the forest's spiritual network. The twisted passages and mind-bending architecture of corrupted forest temples reflect what happens when sacred spaces are turned against their original purposes. Chambers that once facilitated spiritual transformation become mazes designed to confuse and trap. Puzzles that once taught patience and wisdom become obstacles that must be overcome through force and determination. The very walls seem to actively resist visitors, creating an environment where progress requires not just solving challenges, but healing fundamental damage to the temple's spiritual foundation. Yet even corrupted forest temples retain echoes of their original beauty and purpose, suggesting that redemption remains possible even after decades or centuries of neglect. The satisfaction that comes from cleansing these spaces, from restoring proper flow to their magical systems and returning them to their roles as protectors rather than prisons, speaks to something deep in human nature, our need to see broken things made whole, to witness the victory of healing over harm. The seasonal cycles that govern these forest realms reveal another dimension of their magic, one that connects them to the great rhythms that govern all natural life. Unlike the static dungeons found in many fantasy games, these woodland temples and clearings change character with the passing seasons, their challenges and rewards shifting as winter gives way to spring, as summer abundance yields to autumn harvest. This variability requires visitors to understand timing as well as technique, to appreciate that some secrets can only be revealed when conditions are exactly right. The fairy folk that inhabit these woodlands represent perhaps the most mysterious aspect of forest magic, beings who exist at the intersection of plant and animal, mortal and immortal, helpful and dangerous. These creatures embody the forest's own consciousness, serving as its eyes and ears, its voice and hands. Their willingness to help heroes often depends not on payment or persuasion, but on the visitor's demonstrated respect for the woodland realm and understanding of their role within its greater ecosystem. Great fairy fountains, hidden in the deepest recesses of these magical woodlands, represent places where forest magic reaches its highest concentration and most generous expression. Here, in chambers where water flows with its own inner light and the air itself seems alive with possibilities, heroes can receive blessings that enhance not just their equipment, but their very connection to the natural world. These aren't simply power-ups, but initiations into deeper levels of woodland citizenship, acknowledgments that the visitor has proven worthy of the forest's trust and protection. As our journey through these enchanted groves draws toward its close, we find ourselves changed by the experience. Our understanding deepened not just of how fantasy forests function, but of what real wilderness means to the human spirit. These digital woodlands succeed as art because they tap into something ancient in human memory. Our species' long relationship with forest environments that provided both sanctuary and challenge, both resources and mystery. The whispered songs that follow, travelers who leave these sacred groves speak not of endings, but of continuing connection, of bonds forged between human consciousness and the green world that sustains all life. In the rustling of leaves and the play of light through canopies, in the patient wisdom of ancient trees and the quick laughter of forest spirits, we hear reminders that magic doesn't require belief to exist. It simply requires the humility to recognize that we are part of something larger, older, and more wonderful than any single mortal life can encompass. Tomorrow's heroes will walk these same winding paths, face these same tests of courage and wisdom, and discover for themselves that the greatest treasures of the forest aren't found in hidden chests or secret chambers, but in the understanding that comes from learning to belong to something greater than ourselves. In the eternal twilight of the sacred groves, every ending becomes a beginning, every departure becomes an invitation to return, and every song becomes part of the endless melody that connects all things in harmonious whole. Where the earth ends and heaven begins, where mortal ambition reaches upward to touch the realm of gods and ancient powers, we discover some of the most extraordinary achievements in all of fantasy architecture. Floating cities that defy gravity itself, sky islands that drift through clouds like ships sailing celestial seas, and aerial civilizations that have learned to call the endless blue their home. These are the floating realms of Hyrule, places where the impossible becomes routine, where the very concept of limitation dissolves in thin air, and where we encounter some of the most profound questions about what it means to transcend the boundaries that normally define existence. Skyloft stands as perhaps the most complete realization of aerial civilization ever conceived, a floating settlement that doesn't simply exist in the sky but belongs there, its every detail designed around the unique opportunities and challenges that come with life above the clouds. Here, in a community suspended impossibly in open air, we find architecture that embraces weightlessness rather than fighting it, transportation systems based on partnership with great birds rather than domination of landscape, and a culture that has transformed the sky from barrier into foundation for an entire way of life. The genius of Skyloft's design lies in how completely it reimagines basic assumptions about how communities function. On solid ground, settlements spread outward from central points, connected by roads that follow the path of least resistance across terrain. Skyloft, freed from terrestrial constraints, develops vertically and aerially, its buildings connected not by streets, but by bridges that span open air, its districts linked by flight paths that curve through three-dimensional space rather than following the two-dimensional logic of surface travel. The real-world inspiration for such floating cities draws from humanity's oldest dreams of flight and transcendence. The cloud cities of mythology, from the Greek Mount Olympus floating above mortal concerns, to the aerial kingdoms of Hindu cosmology, where gods dwell in palaces that drift through eternal sky, provide the conceptual foundation. Yet Skyloft also draws from more practical inspirations, the mountaintop settlements of places like Machu Picchu, where communities built on impossible terrain seem to float above the world below, or the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde, where ancient peoples created homes that appeared to defy gravity itself. The technology that makes Skyloft possible, those mysterious floating stones that provide the fundamental force keeping the island aloft, represents more than mere magical convenience. These artifacts suggest a level of technological achievement that transcends our current understanding of physics, yet they're integrated so seamlessly into daily life that Skyloft's residents take them for granted. This casual relationship with miraculous technology reflects how truly advanced civilizations might develop, not through dramatic breakthroughs that revolutionize everything overnight, but through gradual integration of extraordinary capabilities into ordinary life until the miraculous becomes mundane. The loftwing culture that develops around these great birds reveals another dimension of aerial civilization, the partnership between human intelligence and natural flight capability that makes true three-dimensional living possible. Unlike ground-based transportation where vehicles serve as tools operated by human controllers, the relationship between Skyloft residents and their loftwings approaches genuine collaboration. Each bird bonds with a specific person, developing communication and trust that goes far beyond mere training into something approaching telepathic connection. This interspecies partnership draws inspiration from real-world traditions of working with flight-capable animals, from the falconry practices of medieval nobility to the messenger pigeon systems that connected distant cities before modern communication technology. Yet the loftwing bond transcends these earthly parallels by incorporating elements of spiritual communion that transform practical cooperation into something approaching sacred relationship. The annual wing ceremony, where young pilots demonstrate their aerial skills, serves not just as competition, but as celebration of this unique form of partnership. The Night Academy that trains Skyloft's protectors represents perhaps the most sophisticated flight-based education system ever imagined. Here, students learn not just individual flying skills, but aerial formations, three-dimensional tactics, and the complex navigation required to move safely through airspace where a wrong turn might mean plummeting to certain death. The Academy's curriculum necessarily integrates physical training with mental discipline, since aerial combat demands split-second decision-making while managing both personal safety and partnership with a living, thinking mount. The Academy's architecture itself demonstrates the unique possibilities of aerial construction, buildings that can extend platforms and bridges into open air without concern for ground-level support, classrooms with walls that open entirely to sky, and training facilities where gravity becomes variable rather than constant force. The famous training course where students learn aerial maneuvers incorporates challenges that would be impossible in ground-based settings, requiring mastery of three-dimensional thinking that transforms spatial relationships into artistic expression. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Skyloft's culture lies in how it maintains connection to the surface world far below while developing its own distinct identity. The cloud barrier that separates sky from surface serves not as absolute division, but as permeable membrane. Residents know that another world exists beneath the clouds, yet they've developed their own complete civilization that doesn't depend on surface resources or support. This independence allows them to maintain their aerial identity while remaining capable of interaction with terrestrial cultures when necessary. The Great Sky Island Cluster, found in Tears of the Kingdom, represents a different approach to aerial architecture, not a single massive settlement like Skyloft, but a distributed network of floating platforms that work together to create functional living space. Here we see sky islands as modular components that can be reconfigured and adapted to changing needs, platforms that serve specific functions within a larger aerial ecosystem, rather than attempting to replicate surface-based community patterns in airborne form. The original Temple of Time, found on these sky islands, reveals something profound about the relationship between sacred architecture and aerial environments. This ancient structure, once located on the surface but lifted into the sky for protection and preservation, demonstrates how sacred spaces can transcend their original physical contexts while maintaining their spiritual significance. The temple's presence in the clouds suggests that divinity itself is not bound by terrestrial limitations, that holy places can be relocated without losing their essential character. The Zonai technology integrated throughout these sky islands represents perhaps the most sophisticated anti-gravity systems ever depicted in fantasy. Unlike the mysterious floating stones of Skyloft that provide lift through unexplained magical properties, Zonai devices operate through principles that seem almost scientific in their consistency and predictability. These floating platforms, rotating gears, and mechanical constructs suggest a civilization that didn't simply discover how to defeat gravity, but learned to treat it as one variable among many in complex engineering calculations. The City in the Sky from Twilight. Princess presents yet another model for aerial civilization, not a natural floating island or magically suspended settlement, but a constructed city that exists purely through technological mastery. Here we encounter the Uka, a race that has adapted so completely to aerial existence that they've lost the ability to function in terrestrial environments, becoming living embodiments of the principle that form follows function in evolutionary development. The Uka represent perhaps the most extreme example of how aerial living might shape biological evolution. Their adaptation to three-dimensional movement in weightless environments has produced body plans that would be impossible on solid ground, but perfectly suited for navigating the complex mechanical systems of their sky city. Their culture reflects this adaptation: social structures based on aerial hierarchy, architecture that assumes inhabitants can move in any direction rather than being bound by up and down, and technology that integrates seamlessly with their own biological capabilities. The city's mechanical systems demonstrate how advanced aerial civilizations might solve the practical challenges of sky living. The great fans that keep the city aloft operate through principles that seem almost industrial in their sophistication, suggesting manufacturing capabilities and resource management systems that can function entirely independent of surface support. The city's ability to maintain itself across centuries or millennia implies not just technological achievement, but institutional knowledge and cultural continuity of remarkable stability. Yet the city in the sky also reveals the potential isolation and vulnerability that comes with aerial living. Cut off from surface resources and dependent entirely on their own systems, the Uka face unique risks that ground-based civilizations never encounter. When their technology fails or their population declines, they cannot simply migrate to new territories or trade with neighboring communities. They must solve their problems with only the resources available in their floating domain. The various sky temples and aerial shrines scattered throughout these floating realms serve as meditation on how sacred architecture functions when freed from terrestrial constraints. These structures can incorporate elements impossible in ground-based construction, chambers where worshippers float freely rather than kneeling on solid floors, altars that drift through space rather than remaining fixed in position, and holy spaces where the very concept of orientation becomes fluid and transformative. The wind-based puzzles and challenges found throughout these aerial realms require visitors to think in fundamentally different ways about cause and effect, force and resistance. Success depends not on applying terrestrial logic to sky problems, but on developing what might be called aerial consciousness, understanding how currents and pressure differentials create opportunities for movement and manipulation that don't exist in solid environments. The various floating platforms and drifting islands that populate these sky realms tell stories of civilizations that achieved varying degrees of success with aerial living. Some platforms show evidence of thriving communities that managed to create sustainable sky-based cultures. Others reveal the ruins of settlements that couldn't maintain the complex balance required for permanent aerial existence. These archaeological remnants suggest that floating civilization, while possible, requires levels of technological sophistication and social cooperation that not all cultures can achieve or maintain. The seasonal patterns that govern wind and weather in these high altitudes create environmental challenges unknown to surface dwellers. Sky communities must deal with storm systems that can literally blow their homes apart, pressure changes that affect both technology and biology, and temperature variations that result from altitude rather than latitude. The successful aerial civilizations have learned to work with these patterns rather than fighting them, developing seasonal migration routes that follow favorable weather systems and architectural techniques that can withstand or adapt to atmospheric changes. As our exploration of these celestial realms draws toward its close, we find ourselves contemplating something profound about human ambition and the lengths to which imagination can carry us when freed from ordinary limitations. These floating cities and sky islands represent more than mere fantasy architecture. They embody our species' eternal desire to transcend boundaries, to find ways of living that aren't constrained by conventional understanding of what's possible. The gentle sound of wind through aerial bridges, the sight of clouds drifting past windows that open onto infinity, the sensation of stepping onto platforms that rest on nothing but ancient magic and engineering genius. These details create environments that speak to something deep in human consciousness, our ancient dreams of flying, of rising above earthly concerns into realms where different rules apply and new possibilities unfold. In these floating realms, we discover that the sky isn't empty space to be conquered, but living environment to be inhabited, not barrier to overcome, but medium to be mastered. The civilizations that thrive in these aerial domains succeed not by imposing terrestrial patterns on celestial space, but by developing entirely new ways of thinking about community, architecture, and the relationship between technology and environment. The eternal dance of clouds and platforms, the endless circulation of wind through floating cities, the patient revolution of mechanical systems that keep impossible places inhabitable. All of these remind us that the greatest achievements come not from forcing reality to match our preconceptions, but from discovering what becomes possible when we learn to work with forces greater than ourselves. In the floating realms above Hyrule, we find not escape from the world below, but transformation of everything we thought we knew about the relationship between earth and sky, between limitation and transcendence, between the grounded and the sublime. Where winter reigns eternal and the very air crystallizes with each breath, where silence stretches across landscapes painted in shades of white and blue, so pure they seem to cleanse the soul, we enter the frozen reaches of Hyrule's northern territories, realms where survival becomes an art form, practiced by those hardy enough to find beauty in the world's harshest conditions. These are the ice-locked domains, where cold itself becomes a character in every story, where the struggle against freezing temperatures shapes cultures as surely as desert heat forges the Gerudo, and where some of the most remarkable examples of adaptation and resilience in all the kingdom can be found thriving against impossible odds. The Hebra region stretches across Hyrule's northwestern reaches like a vast white sea frozen in time, its snow-covered peaks and glacier-carved valleys creating landscapes so pristine and forbidding that they seem to exist in a different world entirely. This isn't merely cold weather, but cold as fundamental force, temperatures so extreme that they transform the very nature of existence, making every breath a conscious act and every step a carefully calculated risk. Yet within this apparent hostility, we discover ecosystems and communities that have learned not just to endure, but to thrive, finding in winter's grip the seeds of unique beauty and strength. The real-world inspiration for these frozen realms draws from our planet's most spectacular Arctic and alpine environments, particularly the fjord-carved coastlines of Norway, where ice and stone collaborate to create some of Earth's most dramatic scenery. The way mountains rise directly from frozen seas, the manner in which glaciers carve valleys of impossible beauty, The sheer scale of landscapes where human presence becomes a tiny note in a vast symphony of ice and stone. All of these elements find expression in Hyrule's northern territories. Yet these digital winterlands also capture something of the Siberian wilderness, where small communities survive in isolation so complete that the nearest neighbor might be hundreds of kilometers away across trackless snow. The psychological dimension of such isolation, where the human spirit must find strength to endure not just physical hardship, but the mental challenges of endless white horizons and months-long nights, adds depth to these frozen realms that goes beyond mere environmental challenge into exploration of what isolation does to consciousness itself. Rito Village represents perhaps the most successful adaptation to extreme cold found anywhere in the fantasy genre, a community that has learned to use winter conditions as advantages rather than merely obstacles to overcome. Perched impossibly on rock pillars that rise from frozen Lake Totori, the village demonstrates architectural principles that work with rather than against the forces of ice and wind that dominate this region. The village's vertical construction reflects practical wisdom, born from Arctic living, in environments where ground-level temperatures can drop to lethal levels. Elevation becomes survival strategy. The spiraling platforms and bridges that connect the village's different levels take advantage of thermal layering, placing living spaces at heights where even in winter some warmth can be found. The distinctive pod-like structures that house individual families aren't simply aesthetic choices, but sophisticated responses to wind patterns and heat retention. Their curved surfaces designed to shed ice buildup while maintaining internal warmth. The Rito themselves embody the principle of evolutionary adaptation taken to logical extremes, their transformation from the aquatic Zora into aerial beings capable of thriving in frozen conditions, representing one of the most dramatic species adaptations in the Zelda universe. Their feathered forms provide natural insulation against temperatures that would quickly kill other races, while their flying capabilities allow them to hunt and gather across territories that would be inaccessible to ground-bound creatures during winter months. Rito culture reflects this adaptation in every aspect of their social organization. Their renowned archery skills emerge not from abstract martial tradition, but from practical necessity. When hunting must be conducted from the air across vast distances, precision becomes essential for survival. The famous Rito warriors, who serve as elite archers throughout Hyrule, carry with them techniques developed in conditions where missing a shot might mean starvation for an entire family during the lean months of deep winter. The musical traditions that flourish in Rito Village demonstrate how even the most challenging environments can become sources of artistic inspiration. The village's signature melody, that haunting theme that echoes across the frozen landscape, emerges directly from the acoustic properties of ice and stone, wind and altitude. Rito musicians have learned to compose with the environment itself as collaborator, creating songs that incorporate the natural harmonics of wind through mountain passes and the resonant qualities of sound across frozen water. Snow Peak Mansion, that mysterious ruin found deep in the mountain wilderness, represents a different approach to surviving in frozen territories. The grand estate that attempts to impose civilized comfort upon wilderness conditions through sheer determination and elaborate engineering. Here, in chambers where massive fireplaces once blazed and where the remnants of sophisticated heating systems still line the walls, we find evidence of a culture that refused to adapt to winter, but instead tried to create summer within winter's domain. The mansion's current inhabitants, Yetta and Yeto, represent yet another model for cold weather survival. The approach that embraces winter's challenges while maintaining optimism and hospitality that seem to defy the harsh conditions surrounding them. These gentle Yeti demonstrate that survival in extreme environments doesn't require becoming cold oneself. That warmth of spirit can persist even when thermometers register temperatures that would freeze exposed flesh in minutes. The mansion itself tells a fascinating story of architectural ambition meeting environmental reality. The grand halls and elaborate chambers speak of designers who envisioned creating a palace that could rival anything found in temperate climates, complete with formal dining rooms, elaborate guest quarters, and reception halls suitable for entertaining on the most lavish scale. The massive fireplaces and sophisticated chimney systems reveal engineering knowledge focused on maintaining comfortable temperatures throughout a structure large enough to house dozens of people in luxury. Yet the mansion's current ruined state also reveals the ultimate futility of fighting environment rather than working with it. The collapsed sections where ice and wind have claimed victory over human engineering, the chambers where snow drifts through broken windows, and wild animals have made their dens among once elegant furnishings, all serve as reminders that in extreme environments, survival depends more on adaptation than on domination. The mysterious military equipment scattered throughout the mansion's chambers, armor that fits no known race, weapons designed for unknown conflicts, fortifications that suggest preparation for wars that may never have come, adds another layer to the story of this frozen ruin. These artifacts suggest that the mansion may have served purposes beyond mere residential luxury, perhaps functioning as outpost or stronghold for forces that needed to maintain presence in the frozen north for strategic rather than personal reasons. The Wind Temple, accessible only through the most treacherous aerial routes above Hebra's highest peaks, represents sacred architecture designed specifically for extreme altitude and weather conditions. Unlike temples in more hospitable environments that might emphasize beauty or comfort, the Wind Temple acknowledges that spiritual practice in extreme conditions requires different approaches entirely. Here, in chambers where the very air grows thin and where temperature fluctuations can shatter stone, we find sacred space that incorporates environmental extremes into its spiritual function. The temple's design philosophy reflects understanding that transcendence sometimes requires embracing rather than escaping physical challenge. The trials found within these wind-scoured halls don't simply test spiritual devotion, but demand physical endurance that pushes visitors to their absolute limits. Success requires not just faith or wisdom, but the kind of determination that emerges only when survival itself hangs in balance. The acoustic properties of the Wind Temple reveal another dimension of cold weather architecture, how extreme temperatures and altitude affect sound transmission and resonance. The temple's chambers create unique sonic environments where whispers can carry across vast spaces, while shouts might be absorbed and muffled by ice formations. These acoustic effects aren't accidental, but deliberately incorporated into the temple's spiritual function, creating spaces where meditation and prayer take on qualities impossible in more conventional settings. The various ice-based puzzles and challenges found throughout these frozen realms require visitors to understand the unique properties of water in its solid state, how ice expands and contracts with temperature changes, how different types of ice formation create different structural properties, how the interaction between ice and wind creates opportunities for movement and manipulation that don't exist in liquid or gaseous environments. The seasonal patterns that govern life in these frozen territories create rhythms completely unlike those found in temperate climates. Rather than the gentle transitions between spring and summer, autumn and winter found in more moderate regions, these northern territories experience dramatic shifts between brief periods of relative warmth and extended seasons of cold, so intense that survival becomes the primary occupation of every living thing. Communities must prepare for these cycles with precision that approaches military planning, stockpiling resources, and preparing shelter systems that can sustain life through months when venturing outside might mean death. The wildlife that thrives in these conditions demonstrates remarkable adaptations to extreme cold. The creatures that call these frozen wastes home, from the massive bears that den in ice caves to the aerial predators that hunt across snow-covered landscapes, represent evolutionary solutions to challenges that push the boundaries of what life can endure. These animals don't simply tolerate cold, but have learned to use winter conditions as advantages in hunting, shelter construction, and territorial defense. The psychological effects of extended isolation in extreme cold create unique challenges that go beyond mere physical survival into questions of mental health and community cohesion. The long nights and endless white horizons that characterize these regions can produce forms of cabin fever and seasonal depression that require cultural solutions as sophisticated as any technological adaptation. The communities that thrive in these conditions have developed social rituals, storytelling traditions, and cooperative activities specifically designed to maintain mental health and group morale during the most challenging periods. The aurora phenomena that occasionally light these northern skies create moments of transcendent beauty that remind inhabitants why some choose to make their homes in such challenging conditions. These displays of natural light dancing across star-filled heavens transform the harsh landscape into something approaching divine revelation, suggesting that beauty of sufficient intensity can justify any amount of hardship required to witness it. As our journey through these frozen realms draws toward its close, we find ourselves understanding something profound about the relationship between environment and character, between the challenges we face and the strength we develop to meet them. The communities that thrive in Hyrule's frozen north succeed not by conquering winter, but by learning to dance with it, finding in its rhythms opportunities for beauty, growth, and achievement that simply don't exist in easier climates. The crystalline silence that follows a fresh snowfall, the way morning light transforms ice formations into sculptures of impossible delicacy, the fierce satisfaction that comes from maintaining warmth and life in conditions that seem designed to extinguish both. These experiences create connections to fundamental forces that shape not just survival, but identity itself. In the frozen reaches of Hyrule, we discover that the greatest achievements often bloom in the harshest soil, that communities forged in adversity develop bonds stronger than any found in comfortable circumstances. The eternal winter continues its patient work of sculpture and selection, carving beauty from stone and strength from those who refuse to yield to its apparent hostility. In the dance between ice and determination, between isolation and community, between the harsh requirements of survival and the human need for meaning and beauty, we find some of the most profound lessons about what it means to not just endure, but thrive. In a world that offers no guarantees of comfort or safety, where the endless expanse of ocean meets scattered fragments of land, where the rhythm of waves against weathered shores creates the heartbeat of entire civilizations, we discover communities that have learned to call the margin between sea and sky their home. These are the coastal havens and island settlements of Hyrule, places where the vast mysteries of the deep meet the intimate scale of human habitation, where survival depends not on conquering the sea, but on learning to read its moods, respect its power, and find sustenance in the generous abundance that flows between tide lines and fishing grounds. The genius of these maritime communities lies in how they transform the apparent isolation of island living into sources of strength rather than limitation. Cut off from the great trade routes and political centers that define continental civilization, these coastal settlements have developed cultures of remarkable self-sufficiency and adaptation, communities where every resident understands their role not just in human society, but in the larger ecosystem of sea and shore that sustains all life in these watery realms. Windfall Island stands as perhaps the most complete realization of island community life, a bustling settlement that has grown into something approaching a small city despite its geographic isolation. Here, on a landmass that could be walked across in less than an hour, we find evidence of how human ingenuity can create complexity and richness even within the tightest spatial constraints. The island's architecture demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how to maximize limited space while maintaining the open feeling necessary for psychological health in communities where escape is measured in boat lengths rather than walking distances. The real-world inspiration for such maritime communities draws from humanity's long history of island settlement, particularly the Mediterranean coastal towns, where generations have learned to balance between land and sea. The fishing villages of the Greek islands, where whitewashed buildings cascade down hillsides toward harbors filled with boats that represent both livelihood and lifeline to the wider world, provide one clear model. The seaside communities of coastal Ireland, where stone cottages huddle against Atlantic winds while their inhabitants harvest both sea and land for sustenance, offer another. Yet these digital island communities also reflect the unique characteristics of Pacific island cultures, where small populations developed remarkably sophisticated techniques for ocean navigation, resource management, and social organization. The way these real-world communities learn to read weather patterns that might be invisible to continental dwellers, to navigate by stars and currents across vast distances of open water, to maintain cultural identity while remaining open to beneficial trade and cultural exchange. All of these elements find expression in Hyrule's maritime settlements. The economic systems that emerge from island living reveal how geographic constraints can become sources of innovation rather than merely obstacles to overcome. Windfall Island's economy, built around the auction house where rare goods from across the Great Sea find their way to eager buyers, demonstrates how isolated communities can become focal points for trade. by offering services that can't be found elsewhere. The island's position as neutral meeting ground, where merchants from different cultures can gather without the territorial tensions that might complicate trade in more politically charged locations, transforms geographic isolation into economic advantage. The social dynamics of island communities create unique patterns of cooperation and conflict resolution that reflect the practical realities of life, where neighbors can't simply move away when disagreements arise. The residents of these coastal settlements must develop sophisticated skills in diplomacy and compromise, since maintaining community harmony becomes essential for survival, when the alternative might be exile to places where solo survival is impossible. Lurelin Village represents a different model of coastal living, one that emphasizes integration with natural systems rather than dominance over them. This settlement, nestled between tropical forests and azure waters, demonstrates how communities can develop in harmony with their environment when they build their entire way of life around understanding and working with natural cycles rather than attempting to impose artificial patterns upon them. The architecture of Lurelin reflects this philosophy in every detail, from the distinctive curved roofs that echo the shapes of boats and waves to the elevated platforms that protect homes from storm surges while allowing ocean breezes to flow freely underneath. The village's layout follows the natural contours of the coastline rather than imposing geometric patterns that might make sense in continental settings, but ignore the unique requirements of shore-based living. The fishing culture that defines Lurelin's identity reveals how maritime communities develop intimate relationships with the sea that go far beyond mere resource extraction into something approaching spiritual communion. The village's fishers don't simply catch fish. They participate in ancient dialogues between human need and ocean abundance, understanding their role as partners in ecosystem management rather than external exploiters taking whatever they can claim. The techniques developed by these coastal fishers demonstrate remarkable sophistication in reading natural signs that might be invisible to outsiders. They understand how moon phases affect fish behavior, how seasonal changes in water temperature create migration patterns that can be anticipated and prepared for, how weather systems developing far beyond the horizon will influence fishing conditions days or weeks in advance. This knowledge represents accumulated wisdom passed down through generations of families whose survival depended on understanding the sea's rhythms better than the sea understands them itself. The boat-building traditions found in these communities represent perhaps the most sophisticated examples of appropriate technology ever developed. Vessels designed not for maximum speed or cargo capacity, but for perfect integration with local conditions. These boats must handle everything from calm water fishing expeditions to emergency evacuations during storms, from long-distance trading voyages to daily transportation between islands, scattered across miles of open water. The distinctive hull designs that emerge from different coastal communities reflect intimate understanding of how various sea conditions require different approaches to boat construction. The vessels that serve Lurelin's protected bay differ significantly from those needed for the more challenging waters around other islands, yet all share certain characteristics that mark them as products of cultures that understand the sea as collaborator rather than enemy. Outset Island, where many adventures begin, demonstrates how island communities serve as launching points, not just for individual journeys, but for entire cultural exchanges between isolated settlements and the wider world. This small island, with its handful of families and simple lighthouse, represents the crucial role that remote communities play in maintaining connections across vast distances of water that might otherwise prove impossible to traverse safely. The lighthouse itself serves as symbol of how these coastal settlements contribute to broader maritime culture beyond their own immediate needs. These navigation aids, maintained often at considerable expense and effort by small communities that receive no direct compensation for their work, represent acts of service that extend far beyond tribal or national boundaries into something approaching universal human cooperation. The lighthouse keepers and their families embody a particular form of maritime dedication. People who choose to make their lives at the intersection of sea and shore, specifically to serve others they may never meet. The light that guides ships safely through dangerous waters represents more than mere practical assistance. It serves as beacon of human civilization itself, proof that even in the most isolated locations, people maintain commitment to principles that transcend immediate self-interest. The seasonal rhythms that govern life in these coastal communities create patterns completely unlike those found in continental settlements. Rather than agricultural cycles based on planting and harvest, these maritime cultures organize their year around fishing seasons, storm patterns, and the migration routes of sea life that provides their primary sustenance. Understanding these cycles requires knowledge that combines practical observation with almost mystical sensitivity to natural forces that operate on scales both vast and intimate. The storm seasons that periodically threaten these communities create challenges that test not just infrastructure, but social cohesion and individual courage. When hurricanes or typhoons approach, island communities must make decisions that could determine the survival of their entire culture. Whether to evacuate to higher ground or stronger structures, how to protect boats and equipment that represent years of accumulated wealth, when to ride out the storm, and when to flee to safer locations that might be days of dangerous travel away. The recovery periods that follow such storms reveal another dimension of coastal community life, the remarkable resilience that emerges from cultures accustomed to rebuilding after catastrophic loss. These communities develop traditions and techniques for rapid reconstruction, shared labor systems that can restore essential infrastructure within days or weeks, and psychological frameworks that treat even devastating losses as temporary setbacks rather than permanent defeats. The fishing festivals and maritime celebrations that mark important points in the seasonal calendar serve functions that go far beyond simple entertainment into essential community maintenance. These gatherings reinforce social bonds that might otherwise weaken under the stresses of isolated living, provide opportunities for young people to learn traditional skills from master practitioners, and create shared cultural experiences that maintain group identity across generations. The sea shanties and maritime music that emerge from these communities represent unique art forms that serve practical as well as aesthetic functions. These songs help coordinate group labor during boat launching and net hauling, provide entertainment during long voyages, and preserve cultural knowledge in forms that can be easily remembered and transmitted across generations. The distinctive rhythms and melodies that characterize maritime music reflect the natural cadences of ocean waves and the working patterns of sea-based labor. The trading networks that connect these scattered communities create economic relationships that often transcend political boundaries and cultural differences. Island merchants develop reputations that can span entire ocean regions, their word serving as currency more valuable than any coined metal. The trust required for long-distance maritime trade, where goods might be exchanged across months of travel time with no possibility of immediate verification or enforcement, creates bonds between communities that often prove stronger than formal treaties between nations. The navigation traditions that allow safe travel between these scattered settlements represent some of the most sophisticated non-technological achievements in human history. Master navigators learn to read wave patterns that reveal the presence of distant land, star configurations that can guide voyages across thousands of miles of open ocean, and subtle environmental signs that indicate weather changes days before they become obvious to casual observers. As our journey through these maritime realms draws toward its close, we find ourselves understanding something profound about the relationship between limitation and creativity, between isolation and community, between the challenges imposed by environment and the innovations that emerge from human determination to not just survive, but thrive in circumstances that might seem to offer only hardship. The gentle sound of waves against wooden hulls, the sight of fishing nets drying in salt, sweet breezes, the taste of sea spray carried on winds that have traveled across thousands of miles of open water. These sensory experiences create connections to forces larger than any individual life, yet intimate enough to shape daily experience in profound ways. In these coastal havens, we discover that home is not a place of comfort and security, but a place where we learn to find meaning and beauty in the eternal dance between human need and natural abundance. The tides continue their ancient rhythm, carrying away today's concerns and bringing tomorrow's opportunities, reminding us that permanence lies not in unchanging conditions, but in our ability to adapt, to flow with forces greater than ourselves while maintaining the essential character that makes us who we are. In the maritime communities scattered across Hyrule's endless waters, we find not escape from the challenges of existence, but transformation of those challenges into sources of strength, wisdom, and connection that span far beyond any single shore or season. Where time itself has left its monuments in stone and metal, where the achievements of vanished peoples speak across millennia in languages of architecture and artifact, we discover perhaps the most profound mysteries in all of Hyrule. The ancient ruins that dot the landscape, like scattered fragments of dreams half remembered, the lost civilizations whose shadows still influence the living world, and the technological marvels that challenge our understanding of what was possible in ages past. These are the archaeological treasures that transform every journey through Hyrule into a pilgrimage through deep time itself, where each crumbling wall tells stories of ambition and loss, triumph and tragedy, wisdom gained and knowledge forever lost to the turning of years. The genius of these ancient sites lies not merely in their individual mysteries, but in how they create a palimpsest of civilizations layered one upon another, each generation building upon the foundations left by their predecessors, while adding their own contributions to the accumulated wisdom of ages. To walk through these ruins is to experience history not as abstract academic subject, but as living presence that continues to shape the contemporary world through technologies that still function, mysteries that still puzzle, and warnings that remain urgently relevant. The Zonai ruins scattered across Faron and beyond represent perhaps the most sophisticated examples of this archaeological storytelling. Structures that reveal a civilization whose achievements in engineering and understanding of natural forces surpassed anything found in the modern era. These massive stone constructs, with their distinctive spiral patterns and integration of advanced mechanical systems, speak of a people who understood principles that contemporary Hyruleans can barely comprehend, much less replicate. The real-world inspiration for such archaeological mysteries draws from humanity's own encounters with civilizations whose achievements seem to exceed what should have been possible given the technological limitations of their time. The precision-cut stones of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, fitted together without mortar yet remaining earthquake-resistant for centuries, provide one model for how ancient peoples might have achieved engineering feats that challenge modern understanding. The sophisticated astronomical alignments found at sites like Stonehenge suggest civilizations that possessed mathematical and observational capabilities, far exceeding what conventional historical narratives would predict. Yet the Zonai ruins also reflect more recent archaeological discoveries that have revolutionized our understanding of prehistoric human capabilities. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, where elaborate stone temples were constructed by peoples traditionally dismissed as primitive hunter-gatherers, demonstrate that sophisticated civilization and monumental architecture can emerge far earlier and in more challenging circumstances than previously believed possible. These real-world parallels lend credibility to the idea that Hyrule's ancient peoples might have achieved technological and cultural heights that dwarf the accomplishments of their successors. The mechanical devices integrated throughout Zonai ruins reveal understanding of engineering principles that seem almost anachronistic in fantasy settings traditionally associated with medieval technology levels. The rotating gears and floating platforms, the complex pulley systems and automated mechanisms that still function after millennia of abandonment, suggest not just sophisticated craftsmanship, but systematic understanding of physics and materials, science that approaches or even exceeds modern capabilities in certain specialized areas. These ancient machines operate on principles that blur the line between technology and magic, suggesting civilizations that achieved integration between mystical and mechanical knowledge that contemporary cultures have forgotten how to maintain. The devices respond to spiritual energy as readily as physical manipulation, indicating worldviews that didn't separate material and metaphysical into distinct categories, but understood them as complementary aspects of unified systems governing both natural and artificial processes. The architectural philosophy embedded in Zonai construction demonstrates approaches to building that prioritize harmony with natural forces over domination of landscape. Unlike contemporary structures that impose geometric patterns upon terrain, Zonai builders worked with existing topography, water flow, and geological features to create constructions that seem to have grown from the earth rather than being imposed upon it. This organic integration reflects understanding of environmental systems that goes beyond mere practical knowledge into something approaching mystical communion with natural processes. The astronomical alignments found throughout these ancient sites reveal civilizations that understood celestial mechanics with precision that rivals modern scientific observation. Stone circles that mark seasonal transitions with accuracy measured in minutes rather than days. Architectural features that frame specific star positions at crucial moments in agricultural or ceremonial cycles. Underground chambers positioned to capture particular qualities of natural light at significant times. All of these elements suggest cultures that experienced time and space as sacred dimensions, requiring careful observation and respectful interaction. The symbolic languages carved into these ancient stones present puzzles that continue to challenge scholars and adventurers alike. Unlike simple pictographic systems that represent concrete objects or straightforward concepts, these hieroglyphic traditions seem to encode complex philosophical and technical knowledge in forms that require deep understanding of context and cultural assumption to decode properly. The symbols themselves often serve multiple functions simultaneously, marking direction or location while also conveying spiritual significance and practical instruction. The Sheikah shrines that dot the landscape represent a different but related tradition of ancient technology, structures that combine sophisticated engineering with spiritual purpose in ways that transform practical challenges into opportunities for growth and learning. These mysterious chambers demonstrate understanding of human psychology and learning theory that rivals anything found in contemporary educational philosophy, creating environments where visitors must develop new capabilities rather than simply applying existing knowledge to overcome obstacles. The shrine technology operates through principles that seamlessly blend mechanical precision with mystical sensitivity, creating puzzles and challenges that respond as much to intent and understanding as to physical manipulation. The orbs that must be positioned correctly, the platforms that activate in response to proper sequencing, the barriers that dissolve when approached with appropriate knowledge, all of these elements suggest design philosophies that treat learning itself as sacred activity worthy of architectural celebration. The diversity of shrine designs reveals systematic understanding of different learning styles and psychological approaches to problem solving. Some shrines challenge spatial reasoning and mechanical understanding. Others test patience and careful observation. Still others require creative thinking and willingness to experiment with unconventional approaches. This variety suggests educational theories, sophisticated enough to recognize that effective instruction must adapt to individual differences rather than assuming universal approaches to knowledge acquisition. The ruins of the Twilight Realm present yet another model for how advanced civilizations might develop along completely different trajectories from those familiar to surface dwellers. The architecture found in these shadowy dimensions demonstrates building techniques adapted to environments where normal physical laws operate according to different principles, where gravity and light behave in ways that require fundamental reconceptualization of spatial relationships. The crystalline structures and floating platforms found throughout the Twilight Realm suggest materials science that has learned to work with forces unknown to conventional engineering. These constructions don't simply resist natural forces, but channel and redirect them, creating buildings that exist in dynamic equilibrium with environmental systems rather than static opposition to them. The result is architecture that seems alive, responsive to changes in its environment, while maintaining structural integrity across centuries or millennia of operation. The Palace of Twilight demonstrates how ruling class architecture might develop in civilizations that prioritize spiritual and metaphysical achievements over material accumulation. The chambers and corridors that make up this structure serve ceremonial and administrative functions, but also operate as meditation spaces and spiritual laboratories, where consciousness itself becomes the primary medium for both artistic expression and practical accomplishment. The ancient automation found throughout these ruined civilizations raises profound questions about the relationship between technology and wisdom, between capability and responsibility. Many of these sites contain guardians and defensive systems that continue operating long after their creators have vanished, suggesting societies that anticipated their own disappearance, yet attempted to preserve their knowledge and protect their achievements for future generations to discover and learn from. These automated guardians don't simply attack intruders, but seem designed to test worthiness, responding to the intentions and capabilities of visitors rather than treating all newcomers as threats. The most sophisticated examples demonstrate judgment and discrimination that approaches artificial intelligence, suggesting that these ancient peoples developed understanding of consciousness and decision-making that allowed them to embed genuine wisdom into mechanical systems. The preservation techniques employed by these vanished civilizations reveal understanding of time and entropy that enabled them to create structures capable of surviving millennia while maintaining both functional capability and aesthetic beauty. The materials they used don't simply resist decay, but seem to improve with age, growing stronger and more beautiful as centuries pass rather than deteriorating under environmental pressure. The environmental integration achieved by these ancient builders demonstrates approaches to landscape modification that enhance rather than diminish natural systems. Rather than clearing forests or diverting rivers to make room for their constructions, these civilizations learned to build in ways that supported local ecosystems while serving human needs. The result is archaeological sites that have become more beautiful and biologically diverse over time, rather than less. The mystery schools and knowledge preservation systems embedded in these ancient sites suggest civilizations that understood learning as a lifelong process, requiring institutional support and community commitment. The libraries and teaching chambers found in the deepest levels of these ruins contain not just information, but entire pedagogical systems designed to guide students through progressive levels of understanding over years or decades of study. As our exploration of these ancient mysteries draws toward its close, we find ourselves confronting fundamental questions about progress, achievement, and the cyclical nature of civilization itself. These ruins demonstrate that technological sophistication and cultural achievement don't follow simple linear progressions from primitive to advanced, but rather represent peaks and valleys of accomplishment that rise and fall according to factors that remain only partially understood. The haunting beauty of these archaeological sites speaks to something profound about human ambition and the ultimate fate of all our greatest achievements. The civilizations that built these monuments possessed capabilities that in many ways exceeded those of their successors, yet they too passed away, leaving only stones and metals to speak for accomplishments that once seemed permanent and unshakable. Yet in the persistence of their works, in the continued operation of their machines and the enduring wisdom of their designs, we find evidence that the greatest human achievements transcend the mortality of their creators. These ancient ruins remind us that while individual lives and even entire civilizations may vanish, the knowledge and beauty they create can continue influencing the world for millennia beyond their disappearance. The gentle hum of ancient mechanisms still functioning after countless centuries, the way morning light continues to fall through windows positioned to capture it by architects dead for thousands of years, the satisfaction of solving puzzles designed by minds separated from us by vast chasms of time. All of these experiences connect us to the eternal human project of building meaning and beauty in a world that offers no guarantees of permanence. In these archaeological treasures, we discover that the greatest monuments to human achievement are not the buildings themselves, but the ideas they embody, the knowledge they preserve, and the inspiration they continue to provide to each new generation that encounters their mysteries and marvels. Where light casts its deepest shadows, where the familiar world reveals its hidden face, and where the very concepts of up and down, safe and dangerous, real and unreal become fluid and uncertain. We enter the shadow realms that exist parallel to ordinary reality, places where the rules that govern normal existence bend and twist into new configurations, where different laws of physics apply, and where entire civilizations have learned to thrive in conditions that would seem impossible to surface dwellers. These are the mirror worlds and underground domains that remind us that existence extends far beyond the narrow band of reality we normally perceive, into dimensions where darkness itself becomes a source of power, and where the deepest truths about the nature of reality can only be discovered by those brave enough to venture into realms where conventional wisdom offers no guidance. The genius of these shadow realms lies not in their simple opposition to the world above, but in how they complete it, serving as necessary counterparts that reveal aspects of existence invisible from surface perspective alone. These aren't merely dark versions of familiar places, but entirely different approaches to civilization, architecture, and the fundamental relationship between consciousness and environment that suggest alternative paths of development that mortal cultures might have taken under different circumstances. The Twilight Realm stands as perhaps the most complete realization of parallel dimension civilization ever conceived, a place where the basic assumptions about light, matter, and identity that govern surface existence simply don't apply. Here, in landscapes where geometry follows emotional logic rather than physical law, where buildings float unsupported and bridges span impossible distances, we encounter architecture that responds to mental states rather than structural engineering, creating environments that shift and change based on the psychological condition of their inhabitants. The real-world inspiration for such shadow realms draws from humanity's oldest mythological traditions about underworlds and parallel dimensions, particularly those found in Celtic and Germanic folklore, where fairy kingdoms exist alongside mortal reality, but operate according to completely different natural laws. The Norse concept of the 9 worlds, connected by Yggdrasil, each operating according to its own physical and spiritual principles, provides one model for how multiple realities might coexist while maintaining distinct characteristics and purposes. Yet the Twilight Realm also reflects more modern theoretical concepts from physics and philosophy, particularly ideas about parallel dimensions where familiar forces like gravity and electromagnetism might work differently, where time might flow at different rates or in different directions, where consciousness itself might play a more direct role in shaping physical reality than it does in our own universe. These speculative frameworks lend conceptual depth to fantasy realms that might otherwise seem purely arbitrary in their strangeness. The Twilight people who inhabit this shadow realm demonstrate how intelligent beings might evolve under radically different environmental conditions while maintaining recognizable patterns of social organization and cultural achievement. Their elongated forms and graceful movements reflect adaptation to a realm where normal gravitational constraints don't apply, while their sophisticated understanding of Twilight magic suggests intellectual and spiritual development along paths completely unknown to surface dwellers. Twilight architecture embodies principles that challenge fundamental assumptions about how buildings relate to their environment and inhabitants. The Palace of Twilight, with its floating platforms and crystalline structures that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, demonstrates construction techniques that work with forces unknown to conventional engineering. These buildings don't simply resist natural forces, but dance with them, creating structures that exist in dynamic equilibrium with their ever-shifting environment. The Twilight magic that permeates this realm operates through principles that blur the distinction between matter and energy, between physical manipulation and mental intention. Twilight practitioners don't simply cast spells, but reshape reality itself through focused will and deep understanding of how consciousness connects to the fundamental forces that govern existence. This integration of mental and physical suggests worldviews that never developed the sharp separation between subjective and objective that characterizes most surface cultures. The invasion of the surface world by Twilight forces reveals both the power and the tragedy of parallel dimension civilization. The Twilight possessed capabilities that surface dwellers could barely comprehend, yet their understanding of mortal psychology and social organization proved fatally limited. Their attempt to impose Twilight realm physics upon surface reality created chaos precisely because they failed to appreciate how deeply surface life depends on the stability of natural laws that they could manipulate at will. The depths beneath Hyrule represent a completely different approach to Shadow Realm civilization, demonstrating how underground environments might support complex societies that develop independently of surface influence. These vast subterranean spaces, illuminated by mysterious light sources and populated by creatures adapted to perpetual darkness, reveal an entire world that exists literally beneath the feet of surface dwellers, yet remains almost completely unknown to them. The geography of the depths mirrors the surface world in inverse, creating a shadow landscape where valleys become peaks and mountains become chasms, where the familiar map of Hyrule appears in photographic negative that reveals hidden relationships and connections invisible from above. This inversion suggests that understanding any realm fully requires examining it from multiple perspectives, that surface appearances might conceal underlying structures that can only be appreciated from seemingly impossible vantage points. The ancient mining operations and industrial complexes found throughout the depths reveal civilizations that mastered large-scale resource extraction and processing, using techniques that remain mysterious to contemporary surface cultures. The massive excavations and sophisticated mineral processing facilities suggest understanding of geology and metallurgy that achieved results impossible with conventional technology. Yet the methods employed remain enigmatic to those who discover these abandoned installations. The Yiga clan's adaptation to life in the depths demonstrates how surface-dwelling peoples might learn to thrive in shadow environments when motivated by sufficient determination or desperation. Their transformation from desert-dwelling assassins into underground dwellers reveals remarkable flexibility in human adaptation, suggesting that the boundaries between different environmental niches might be more permeable than commonly assumed. The various boss battle arenas and colosseums found in the deepest levels of these underground realms suggest that shadow civilizations developed their own forms of entertainment and ritual combat, adapted to environments where normal spatial relationships don't apply. These chambers, with their impossible architecture and gravity-defying arena designs, create battlegrounds that test not just strength and skill, but adaptability to conditions that challenge basic assumptions about movement and positioning. The Dark World from earlier Zelda iterations presents yet another model for parallel reality, one where familiar landscapes become twisted into nightmarish versions that reveal hidden truths about the relationship between moral and physical corruption. In these realms, the very terrain responds to spiritual contamination, creating environments where evil intentions manifest as physical obstacles, and where redemption requires not just defeating external enemies, but healing fundamental damage to the fabric of reality itself. The transformation mechanics that operate in these corrupted landscapes suggest deep connections between consciousness and environment that surface dwellers rarely appreciate. The way heroes must adapt to altered physics and transformed geography reflects understanding that personal growth often requires abandoning familiar approaches to problem-solving and developing entirely new ways of perceiving and interacting with reality. The various portal systems and dimensional gateways that connect these shadow realms to surface reality reveal sophisticated understanding of how parallel dimensions might interface with each other while maintaining their distinct characteristics. These transition zones, where the laws of one reality gradually give way to those of another, create unique environments where travelers must learn to navigate between different sets of natural laws without losing their essential identity or purpose. The mirror-based transportation systems found throughout these realms suggest that reflection itself might serve as fundamental force, connecting different levels of reality. The way these magical mirrors create pathways between dimensions, while also serving as tools for scrying and communication, demonstrates understanding of how observation and perception might influence the basic structure of space and time. The creatures that inhabit these shadow realms represent evolutionary adaptations to environmental conditions that simply don't exist in surface reality. The beings that thrive in perpetual darkness, that navigate by senses unknown to surface dwellers, that feed on forms of energy that don't register to conventional perception. All of these demonstrate how life might develop along completely different trajectories when freed from the constraints that govern familiar biological processes. The social structures that emerge in these alternative environments reveal how intelligent beings might organize themselves when normal assumptions about territory, resources, and social hierarchy no longer apply. The communities that thrive in shadow realms often develop political systems and cultural practices that seem alien to surface dwellers, yet prove perfectly adapted to the unique challenges and opportunities of their environments. The temporal anomalies found throughout these parallel dimensions suggest that time itself might flow differently in realms where ordinary physical laws don't apply. Areas where past and future seem to coexist, where cause and effect operate in reverse, where memories become tangible objects that can be manipulated and rearranged. All of these phenomena challenge basic assumptions about the nature of existence and suggest that reality might be far more flexible than surface experience would indicate. The artistic and architectural achievements found in these shadow realms demonstrate how aesthetic principles might evolve under completely different environmental conditions. The beauty that emerges from chaos, the harmony that develops from contradiction, the elegant solutions to problems that don't exist in surface reality, all of these suggest that creativity and achievement aren't limited to familiar forms, but can flourish in any environment where intelligent beings apply imagination and determination to their circumstances. As our exploration of these shadow realms draws toward its close, we find ourselves confronting fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself, about the relationship between consciousness and environment, about the infinite possibilities that might exist beyond the narrow range of conditions we normally experience. These parallel dimensions remind us that the familiar world represents only one possible approach to existence among countless alternatives. The profound silence that characterizes many of these shadow realms, broken only by sounds that have no equivalent in surface reality, creates acoustic environments that seem to facilitate forms of thought and perception impossible under normal conditions. The way darkness itself becomes a medium for communication and navigation suggests that human capabilities might extend far beyond what surface experience would indicate possible. In these mirror worlds and underground domains, we discover not escape from reality, but deeper engagement with its hidden dimensions, not refuge from the challenges of existence, but preparation for understanding existence at levels that surface living cannot provide. The shadows cast by familiar objects reveal shapes and relationships invisible under direct light, reminding us that truth often emerges not from illumination, but from careful observation of what lies hidden in the spaces between certainties. The eternal dance between surface and shadow, between the known and the unknowable, between the comfortable limitations of familiar reality and the terrifying freedom of unlimited possibility, continues across all dimensions of existence, reminding us that home lies not in any particular realm, but in our ability to maintain essential identity while adapting to whatever circumstances we encounter on the endless journey toward understanding. As our journey through Hyrule's most iconic locations draws to a close, we find ourselves not just at the end of an exploration, but at the beginning of understanding. Each castle we've visited, every mountain we've climbed, and all the forests, deserts, and mystical realms we've traversed represent more than mere backdrops for adventure. They are living testaments to the power of world building, where real-world inspirations blend seamlessly with pure imagination to create something transcendent. The genius of Hyrule's design lies not just in its visual splendor, but in how each location serves the greater narrative. How a simple fishing village can embody themes of home and belonging. How an ancient temple can represent the weight of history. How a floating city can symbolize the triumph of ambition over natural limits. These places have become real to us because they tap into universal human experiences. The comfort of home, the mystery of the unknown, the challenge of survival, the wonder of discovery. In the end, Hyrule endures because it reflects our own world back to us, transformed and elevated, reminding us that even in the most familiar places, magic might be waiting just around the corner. The legend continues because the land itself has become legendary, a place where every stone tells a story, and every story becomes part of our own.